The day before it happened was unusually clear. The sky was bright and evenly blue, without haze or wind, the kind of calm weather that made forecasts feel unnecessary. The air was light, and the afternoon passed quietly. Children rode bicycles up and down the street, and a lawnmower hummed somewhere in the distance. Nothing about that day suggested anything unusual was approaching. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone vibrated with an emergency notification. It warned of severe weather expected the following day. Heavy rainfall, possible flooding. Residents were advised to avoid unnecessary travel and remain indoors during the evening hours. I remember stepping outside after reading the alert and looking up at the sky. There were no clouds forming, no distant thunderheads. The horizon was perfectly clear. The warning felt disconnected from what I could see, but weather alerts are often overly cautious. I dismissed it and went back inside. That night, the temperature dropped faster than expected. It wasn't cold, but the air felt strangely still, as if something had pressed down on the atmosphere. By morning, the sky had changed. A thick, uniform layer of cloud covered everything. It hadn't rolled in like a normal storm front. It was simply there, stretching across the entire sky like a gray ceiling. Another alert arrived just after midday. The warning had been upgraded. Severe weather conditions were expected that evening. Residents were advised to remain indoors. Still, there was no rain. What stood out instead was the quiet. The neighborhood had lost its usual rhythm. No dogs barking, no birds overhead. Even the distant traffic from the main road seemed to have faded away. The first power outage happened shortly after 6:30 in the evening. The lights flickered once and went dark. A few seconds later they came back on, resetting the clocks on the microwave and oven. It felt like a minor interruption. At 7:10, the power went out again. This time it did not return. The house became unnaturally quiet as appliances shut down and the air conditioning stopped mid-cycle. Outside, the streetlights remained dark. My phone buzzed again. The newest alert repeated the same instructions but added one line that unsettled me. Residents should remain indoors and avoid windows until conditions improve. Avoid windows. The rain began a few minutes later. It fell steadily and evenly, but there was something unusual about it. There was no wind pushing it sideways, no thunder in the distance. It simply fell in straight vertical lines, as if gravity were pulling it down with perfect precision. The power still hadn't returned. That was when I remembered the battery-powered radio I kept in the garage. The radio was an old emergency model I had bought years earlier during the bushfires. I placed it on the kitchen counter and slowly turned the dial, expecting to hear weather updates or emergency announcements. Instead, I heard a calm voice. It was clear and steady, with the tone of someone reading a routine report. The voice announced a timestamp and stated that the channel was active under blackout conditions. It referred to the surrounding area as civilian adjacent. There was no attempt to address listeners. It sounded like information being recorded rather than broadcast. 90 seconds later, the voice returned. It reported that civilian movement remained minimal and that monitoring would continue. The phrasing was strangely clinical. Another update followed. Civilian auditory exposure confirmed. Then came the line that made me step away from the window behind the kitchen sink. Visual pattern recognition exceeding safe limits. I turned the volume down and moved farther from the glass. The rain outside continued at the same steady pace, but the air began to feel different. It was difficult to describe exactly what had changed. The neighborhood looked the same, yet the depth of the street felt wrong, as though the distance between houses had subtly shifted. The radio delivered another update. Civilian compliance below threshold. At that moment, a light turned on in the house across the street. Mr. Callahan lived there. He was retired and usually awake late into the night. His house was one of the few on the street with a backup generator. When the power failed, the The small engine in his garage usually kicked on within a few seconds. His upstairs window glowed as his silhouette moved toward the glass. He was looking outside. For a moment, everything seemed normal. The rain continued falling across the street, reflecting faintly in the wet pavement. Then, the distortion began. The road looked longer than it should have. The lawns seemed stretched, the houses slightly misaligned, as if the entire street had been pulled outward like an elastic band. Callahan leaned closer to the window. The rain did not touch his glass. Every other surface outside shimmered with water, but his window remained perfectly clear, as though the rain stopped inches before reaching it. The radio crackled. Secondary exposure imminent. Callahan placed his hand against the inside of the glass. For a brief moment, his reflection appeared slightly delayed, like an echo of his movement that arrived a fraction of a second too late. The street seemed to deepen again, the darkness between houses expanding farther than the neighborhood physically allowed. The voice on the radio remained calm. Physical interaction minimal, structural stability confirmed. Then the upstairs light in Callahan's house went out, not flickered, out. The porch light below followed a moment later. His house returned to darkness. The distortion faded slowly. The depth of the street corrected itself, the lawns shortened, and the road returned to its normal proportions. The rain continued falling exactly as before. The radio delivered its final update. Civilian visual confirmation event logged. The broadcast ended suddenly. At the same moment, the power returned. Lights switched on throughout the house. The refrigerator hummed back to life. My phone flooded with delayed notifications. One of them was a weather update announcing that conditions were improving and advising caution when traveling. Outside, the rain had stopped. The street looked perfectly normal. I hardly slept that night. When I woke up, wet pavement reflected the pale morning sky. The clouds had begun to break apart, allowing small patches of sunlight through. For a moment, I convinced myself the entire night had been some kind of interference or emergency exercise. Then I noticed the house across the street. The curtains in Callahan's window were gone. 3 houses on my street never reopened. Callahan's house was one of them. The cars remained in the driveway, but no lights appeared in the windows at night. On the 3rd morning after the storm, council trucks arrived. The vehicles carried no logos. Workers stepped out, boarded the windows, and replaced the locks without speaking to anyone. Each door received the same printed notice: structural assessment pending. The houses were not condemned. They were cleared. No missing person reports appeared online. No announcements were made. Within a few days, life returned to normal. Weeks later, during a brief power outage on an otherwise calm evening, I turned on the radio again. The frequency activated immediately. The same voice spoke once. Final update: containment successful. Residual awareness expected in isolated cases. The power returned seconds later. The channel has remained silent ever since. The cleared houses are still empty. I still keep the radio nearby, not because I expect another storm, but because I understand now that the weather warning was never about rain. It was about limiting observation. Some emergencies are not meant to be understood. They are meant to be endured quietly. And some warnings are not issued for protection. They are issued for containment.